Welcome to Death Holler, the place of haunted hearts and haunted homes. We welcome you to Death Manor, the home that boasts the most ghosts. Come on in. We've been expecting you. Take a look around. You might see someone that you recognize. Do you hear those voices? That's just the Reverend Dr. Death and Llareyna. They're so happy to see you. Sit back and relax. Make yourself at home. Your new home. And remember, when you're in Death Holler, listener discretion is always advised. We hope you enjoy the show.
So what's been going on?
Okay, so the hubby and I have been watching, let me rephrase. The hubby has been watching, I think it's called From. Have you heard of that horror show?
Okay. I have not.
And I've watched the first 2 to 3 episodes, and it's creepy as fuck. So basically, it reminds me of like a horror version of Lost, kind of, because basically it starts with this family. I'm going to give you the real condensed soup version. That is trying to find their way somewhere, and this tree is completely blocking the road. And there's no moving it at all. Like, it's just ginormous. It's like they're at Calavera's big trees in California. You know, one of those falls down. You better have some major equipment to get that out of the way. So they can't, so they turn around, they go another way, and they roll through this town. And they just notice that they keep, no matter which direction they go, they keep rolling through the same area. So they're like in some kind of purgatory of some sorts, or some kind of, I don't know, Bermuda Triangle, if you will, type situation.
Like a Silent Hill type situation.
Yeah. And it's weird because based off where I'm at yet, I don't know if they're alive, if they're dead. But long story short, there's monsters involved in the show. It's a survival for sure. There's 2 teams of people, so you can live at this one house or you can live in this one section of the town. And the house that you can live in is mostly like a headmistress of sorts, you know, some kind of older lady, and it's a bunch of teenagers. And I don't know the whole situation yet of what's going on with that, but the monsters are creepy. The whole thing, there's just no explanation yet, so everything's so unknown. And 13 out of 10, I'm going to recommend people to start watching it for sure. I hope
so you didn't mention what streaming service is it on?
Oh, goodness. I want to say HBO, but let me see. TV series from, I should have probably came equipped with that information. First season, come on. Epics Now. Hello?
That's different.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's what it says. I didn't think it was. For some reason I thought it was HBO. But
I can't remember. Is Epix the one that's free? Maybe that's free to stream then.
I don't know. Epics Now. I'm looking that up. AMC. No?
Oh, okay.
No, it's gotta be. It's gotta be AMC because I knew it was one of the bigger ones. Spend your summer with Epix, watch new episodes. I don't know. It doesn't specify what Epix is. I really want to say AMC though.
Okay, I have access to that, so I'll try to see if I can check it out. I need something new to watch as far as a series, so that'd be good.
And then we've been watching the new Resident Evil series on Netflix again.
God.
That one I've just been witnessing. I haven't been watching it. Hubby's very disappointed, and I am not. Even slightly interested in watching it.
That's the general consensus is disappointment. That's the reason I was wondering what you all would think about that one.
Yeah. So like I said, I haven't really actually set my eyes on it, but it sounds terrible.
As for myself, I decided to torture myself. Not really, but like I figured that's what it was going to be after all the Asian horror that we covered. I figured I would cover one more round of it by there's a movie that I got a long time ago, never watched, called Kuroneko. which is like, I think the translation's like Black Cat, and it's like an older black and white Japanese film, kind of set in during the time when the samurai were like having a kind of a civil war amongst each other. And it's based on an old legend about this guy who leaves his family to go serve in the war, and while he's gone, his wife and his mother, who are left to take care of the homestead, have like this group of these Ronin who come in on them and like basically rape them and kill them and like leave them there and then burn down the house. And their spirits return basically in the form these cats come in and like somehow help them come back from the afterlife, and to exact their revenge upon any samurai who comes across their path. And so like the movie it's pretty well done, actually. It's always, I mean, a lot of the creepier scenes are at night, where like there's this lone traveling samurai who's on, like who meets up with one of them, and being either because he's a horny douchebag, or he's like trying to actually be chivalrous. He he agrees to help them back to their home, and when he gets there, they basically get him drunk on rice wine, and then like whenever he goes to sleep with the wife or whatever, the mother is there to like kind of conduct this ritual, and then like basically the wife, which is the younger of the two, like becomes like this giant like humanoid cat and like rips him to shreds. And like they repeatedly do this to anybody who comes across that's a samurai.
Wow.
It's pretty well done for the time period. The black and white actually adds to it quite a bit, and the way they did their makeup, they've got this weird effect, like, I mean, as ghosts, where they've got like they're like they have no eyebrows, but like there's like black, almost like whiskery eyebrows that have been painted way above their heads to kind of look almost like an anime cat or something, but it's like way before anime, so it's kind of weird in that sense. And I don't know, it's kind of a morality tale too, because the son comes back toward the end of the movie and like he's a samurai now, and so they're sworn to kill all samurai, so now they've got to kill the one person that they actually care about or did care about whenever they were alive, and there's kind of this whole thing with that. So it's actually a pretty good movie.
Damn, you watch some weird shit.
Well, I mean, it was there, and I was like, okay, I've got this Criterion movie. I need to, like, they only put out like the most highly rated by critics. I want to see what this movie's about, and it was actually pretty good.
Yeah.
I had this suggested by a coworker, and I didn't know what to think about it at first. It's okay, is what I'll say about it. It's Case 39. Have you seen this movie?
Haven't seen or heard of it.
So basically, Renee Zellweger is in it, and I can't stand her as an actress, anyways.
Wait. When was this movie made first?
Oh God, I feel like it was late 90s, early 2000s.
I just wanted to see if it was before or after she completely changed her face.
Well, no, it was before the complete. I mean, she still has the pursed lemon look, but it's not as bad as it is now.
Okay.
I mean, 2000. Well, it's 2009. It was later than I thought it was, to be honest with you. But it's still before the worst changes to her face that came later.
Okay.
She's a social worker, which is odd because that plays into the Ring a little bit, or not the Ring, but the Grudge. But anyway, she's sent to this house where this like little girl's. She gets a phone call to go to this house, investigate this little girl whose parents are supposedly like abusing her, and the parents are super weird, and they got this thing where when they come in and they have to prove to like the other social workers there's nothing wrong, they're perfectly upstanding people. But when she's talking to them, like the dad is like seething with rage, he won't even look at her. The mom has to kind of talk for him, and like she's very like weird and all that about it. And whenever the little girl's like acting like she's been beat every day of her life, like her head's down and like she doesn't respond. So like they build this empathy toward the little girl, and whenever Renee Zellweger finally convinces them to go after and save the little girl, that there's something wrong. Like, and it has Ian McShane in it from Deadwood, and also he's the guy who's over the hotel in the John Wick movies, if you know what I'm talking about. He's that guy. When she convinces him to get the cops involved, they actually find the couple trying to burn the girl alive in an oven. So that's how you start the movie out. And turns out the little girl is like been demonically possessed since birth. She's like this evil creature who, whatever your fear is, she's almost like a miniature version of it. Whatever your fear is, she can whisper it back to you, and you will live that, and basically die of fear. And so there's this scene. It's got Bradley Cooper in it, and it's the best scene in the movie, where he tells her, because he's kind of like a child psychiatrist. He's trying to figure out what's wrong with her, and he's not a bad guy. He's literally trying to figure out, because he thought she was really abused, and she's like very cold with him. Whenever she sits down, she kind of reveals to him that there's something off with her, and she asks him, she's like, "What are you most afraid of?" Like, because he asked that to her, and she asked it back to him, but it's like a setup.
Oh,
and
yeah.
He says, well, whenever I was younger, I was like super afraid of like hornets, because I got in a nest of them, and so that night when he goes home, there's a phone ring, kind of like the Ring.
Yeah.
And there's like static on the other end of it, and like but it's almost like a buzzing of like a hornet, and he starts having hornets crawl out of his fucking ear, and it's like it's a cringe scene. Like, it's actually well done, because he's vomiting them up, they're coming out of his ear, they're stinging him. Like, it's nightmare fuel. But the thing is that like the little girl they got to play the bad guy in the movie,
her name's Lilith, by the way. Well, the character's name is Lilith, which, come on now.
The little girl that got to play the part is not a great actress, unfortunately, for a child actor. So that's where it lives and dies, I think. It's got some good concepts, though. I feel like it would be actually a decent movie if they remade it, like, with a better actress. But it had an interesting concept to it.
Sucks. She was in Silent Hill.
Oh, yeah, I remember that.
She just didn't have
she was the little girl in that.
She was decent in that movie, but she also didn't have to do a lot. She just had to be terrified and kind of look blankly and be a different kid, if you will.
Yeah. So that's something you might want to check out sometime. It's not the worst movie ever. I wouldn't rate it as like, a Z grade film that, it's got enough action and stuff to it, and it's got enough decent actors in the movie. Ian McShane and Bradley Cooper, I was surprised that both of them were in it whenever I started watching it. So
it's got some mixed reviews. So IMDb gives it a 6 out of 10. Rotten Tomatoes, the critic score was 21, while the audience score was 39%, so it was liked a little more. 79% of Google users liked the movie, and on Metacritic, it got a 6.6 user score. I don't know if that's out of 10. I'm assuming that's out of 10.
Usually it is.
Yeah, and the Metascore gave it a 25, but is that out of 100?
Maybe. I think theirs is out of 100, to be honest with you.
Okay, yeah, because a 70 is considered good. 25 is in the red, so it got a pretty low score on Metacritic.
Like I said, it's a weird one. It's got, I don't know. There's if the scenes were done in a better way, like in the concept of her, like she can make you live your own fears, like because like the mother, like you never see what she's actually. Well, I think you do actually see, because she's seeing that she's on fire, or there's something like that going on. They've got her strapped to a bed, and she looks like she's ready or going to die at any moment in time, because whatever's happening is happening to her constantly. So that's but nobody can see it other than the person who's experiencing it. So it's got that going on for it. So it's a neat idea. It's just like, I don't think it was that well done in the movie.
It wasn't executed very well.
Yeah. They didn't have the budget or the direction to take it where it needed to go to make it excellent, basically. And the last one I saw, which is I really liked, but I'll admit it's a slow burn. So it's kind of like House of the Devil in that sense, and I know how you feel about those type of things. It's called The Censor, and it's a very recent movie. I want to say it was 2021, 2022 that it came out. It's a fantastic concept for a movie. So it's set during the 80s. Whenever the film censors in Britain under Margaret Thatcher, who was very conservative, had to go through and like scan through all these what they called video nasties, which is what we call in the United States just slasher films, basically.
Video
low-budget
nasties.
horror films. Yeah, that's what they called them. So it's from the concept of these censors, in particular one female censor, who have to sit down and they have to go through these movies that show like just the worst shit ever, like people getting mutilated, like rape, all that stuff. And they have to cut through the movie to get it to where they deem it's acceptable for society. So when there's that whole question, it's like, okay, should the whole artistic expression be released, or are these people actually doing a service by preventing some of this, stuff getting out to the public? And so the gist of the movie is that the concept is, okay, these censors have to sit there and see this unfiltered. So what is that doing to them mentally? Like what's going to happen to them if they're seeing this stuff without somebody else seeing it first?
Yeah.
And the female censor, her and this other guy at the beginning of the movie, that there's a controversy because they see a film, they cut it back, which they feel is acceptable. It gets out and somebody sees it, and he ends up then the guy kills his family in the same method that it does in the movie. So everybody's trying to hold them to blame for the fact they let it get released. But is that the person? I mean, that goes back to the whole argument. It's like anytime something like that happens, is it the person or is it the art? Because other people see it and they don't have that problem, but you get the one person who's in the wrong mental state that sees it, and they go psycho and they do bad things. Well, the parallel narrative to the movie, the interesting part is that she happens to have the same fucking thing happen to her, because her sister has been missing since childhood, and it's a whole big thing between her and her parents that they're estranged over it because they were out together. She lost her sister, who was, I think, younger than her.
Yeah.
And she's always been kind of blamed for it. Well, she sees a movie that's been sent in by a certain director that she's never heard of before, and the little girl that's in the movie, she swears is her sister. So she thinks that her sister has been captured by this director and held all these years to film these movies for him, and they're very graphic, slasher type movies or whatever. And she makes it her personal goal in the movie to find this director, and this, to find, because she knows, because she also finds there's another video he makes later that she gets access to that it looks like an adult version of what she believed her sister to look like. So the whole movie goes behind, you're following her, and she thinks she's investigating her sister's disappearance through this potentially, pedophilic director. But the way the movie's set up, when you get to the ending, it might have been because she got triggered by the movie like the guy did that saw the movie she let get by her. So it's one of those type movies. It's it does a good thing. And the thing I like most about it, it's really artistic about it, because it, anytime that she's experiencing things in her mind that other people might not be experiencing, the scenery turns red around her. It's like her fantasy world is almost a reddish, aggressive type thing. When it's the real world, everything's coated in a bluish gray coloring, normal for Britain, during real kind of rainy season type coloring. It's that's how things are normally. But anytime things turn red, she might not be the best person to be believing at that moment in time. So it's one of those films.
Oh, that's pretty interesting. It got mixed reviews too on this one. So it got really good review on Rotten Tomatoes. Hold on. Rotten Tomatoes gave it, the tomato meter, it got a good score, almost 90%. Audience score gave it about a 60. It's got about a 60 on IMDb, 69% on Metacritic, and 69% of the users liked it on Google. So it's sitting right at about a 6 out of 10.
I wanted to watch it because the guys on Red Letter Media watched it, and they swore up and down by it. And they're hit or miss as far as what I agree with them on stuff, because they're very against a lot of mainstream movies. But when it comes to these kind of weirder indie horror movies, they tend to be closer to what I normally like. So they reckon, and I enjoyed this one quite a bit.
That's pretty cool, actually.
And with that, I think I hear people at the door.
I'll let them in.
your host, the Reverend Dr. Death, back from peddling my miracle fetus rum, and joining me as always is the ghost that can actually pass through closed doors, Llareyna. How are things at the orphanage, Llareyna?
Terrible. Absolutely terrible. These children are unruly. They are worse than the children that we have encountered in Japan. And I'm over it. I am over it right now. I want to beat every single one of them, but every time I throw the chunklet, it just passes right through them.
Yeah, that and when they're not like picking up slugs and other nasty shit all the time. Like these are some dirty kids.
Disgusting, vile little creatures is what they are. Alive or dead, it doesn't matter.
Today we have a child ghost double feature for you. While drastically different films in setting and tone, these movies fall into the style of a whodunit narrative. First up, we have a 2001 film from beloved director Guillermo del Toro, considered by many to be his first real foray into directing, and that includes his own self. He did make a movie prior to the movie we're discussing called Kronos, but he had a lot of issues with that movie, so this is the movie that he calls his first one. And to finish off the episode, we have a criminally underappreciated George C. Scott classic from 1980. So put away your slugs and rough-eared comic books, pull up a seat next to the grand piano, and listen in as we discuss The Devil's Backbone and the original version of The Changeling. If you're enjoying the podcast, we would appreciate if you could take the time to like, comment, and subscribe on whatever podcast platform you prefer. It helps us get more visibility on podcast listings and helps us grow. We appreciate everyone who listens and hope you enjoy the show.
Yeah, and for everyone listening on Amazon Music, man, that is where we're getting our best traction. So I just want to say thank you to Amazon Music for, one, basically telling us, hey, put your podcast on here. And
that's true, they did.
Yeah, and two, I mean, that's where it's killing it right now. So far, almost all the episodes. And since we've joined Amazon Music, I swear that's where, I mean, we're climbing in amount of people downloading our episodes. So thank you, everyone who's listening and taking the time.
Thank you very much. Appreciate that. So this episode, we don't have an Attack of the Bees or I think I downloaded the wrong movie because we didn't feel like the nature of what we were discussing with the ghost children necessarily lend itself to either one of those. That's kind of gross.
Yeah, so we're going to veer away from that.
We're going to just discuss the movies this episode. So sorry about that, but they will be back in the future episode, in the next episodes we're discussing. We'll get to that toward the end of the podcast.
Yes.
The first movie that we have today is The Devil's Backbone, 2001 film, also known as El Espinazo del Diablo.
Yeah. I knew you were going to say it's so cool, which is actually not bad at all. I was expecting it to be a hell of a lot hunkier than that.
Well, I can't add enough of the rolling this and that, but I tried, so there you go.
There's no rolling. There's no R's. It's El Espinazo del Diablo. So, I mean, you just got to change some B's to V's, and that's it.
It's directed by Guillermo del Toro, written by him, Anthony Tresores, or how do you say that name? You probably can pronounce it.
Why does it look like Trashy Whores? Is what I want to know.
That's his name. That's why I was just trying to say it without making it look like it was Trashy Whores.
Trashoras is how you would pronounce that.
Trash Oras? Okay.
But I want to know what that means in English, so please continue, and I will. I'm checking this out.
And David Munoz, written by Javier Navarrete, and a budget of $4.5 million USD, but the box office was only $6.5 million. This did not blow it out of the water, but there's something to be considered with this movie. It came out right after 9/11.
Okay, so hang tight to that real quick. Trashoras, in English, it translates to rubbish. And I could have that. Like that was the Portuguese. So.
Do you think it's like a pseudonym name? I don't know, mate. Because Del Toro always sounded like a made-up name, like for him. Like it was like the Bull. Like okay, that's cool, but like you know what I'm saying? Like I don't know.
Well, maybe, it could be like back in the day how when your last name was Carpenter, it meant that your family descended from carpenters. Things like that.
Oh, that's true. Yeah.
So I honestly thought that Trashoras I was thinking 3 hours, like tres horas. So that's what I thought.
Yeah, okay, I could see that.
I mean, my maiden last name is a derivative of the good life. So I don't feel like I'm living the good life, but I'm living an okay life. if there's a translation for the okay life, that's me.
Yeah, and I've got one of those typical English names. It's just the town that your family originally came from. So there you go.
Yeah.
So what do you think about the fact that it didn't really knock it out of the park at the box office on this one?
I mean, I'm not well versed in Guillermo del Toro's movies. That's the last time I'm saying it like that. I'm not well versed in how well his movies done. I know he's had some pretty epic failures in terms of films. With this one this one was 2001, correct?
Yes.
I'm not surprised only because I don't feel like he was that well known yet. And so for these numbers, and I don't know if this is like current numbers or if that was just at the time. If it was at the time, it would make more sense. I don't know that this movie would have picked up any traction beyond that. So maybe it's not doing super amazing now, but we'll discuss how we feel about the movie as we go in to kind of, discuss numbers a little further.
So here's a comparison, and we'll get to the point of this, the reason I'm comparing the two of these together. But Pan's Labyrinth, which came out after this by about 5 years, was made for about 19 million and it made 89 million. So
wow.
It really did well.
What was the budget of that one?
19 million.
I mean, it had a little bit bigger of a budget. It's not a tiny budget, but that's like 6 times, 4 times the amount,
Yeah. I mean, Pan's Labyrinth, I think, was his first big success, if I remember right.
Yeah.
That's the one that I remember when it came to the theater, everybody was like, oh, now this is everybody needs to see this, The
problem with Pan's Labyrinth and how Guillermo del Toro is as a creator is that it really set the bar really high. And it was almost like you can't do anything even slightly less than Pan's Labyrinth or we're going to hate it.
That's true. I'm glad that I don't know. I saw this movie sometime around Pan's Labyrinth, the one that we're discussing today. So The Devil's Backbone. So I'm happy that I didn't see it like drastically after the fact, because you go back and you see it and you realize it's a much simpler film. But it's not bad for that.
Mm-mm.
It's just but it's not like it's not got the fantasy elements that a lot of his later films have.
Yeah, and I'm just like it's kind of cool to compare the two because it's one thing to have fantasy, but it's one thing to have something that's more realistic. Or that can be, a real situation. So that's the furthest I'm going to go at this early in the podcast on that.
Yeah. Well, we'll get to that because there actually is a through line between these two movies that I didn't even realize until I started researching this. So principal players for this, we have Fernando Tielve playing Carlos, who is a recently orphaned child. He's smart. He's meek. Protagonist. He's basically a stand-in for Guillermo. Like if you listen to Guillermo tell his version, like on the commentary, this character was him. Like the way he was bullied as a kid because he was very artistic and introverted. It's basically a stand-in for him.
Yeah.
He was also in Pan's Labyrinth though, which is interesting. But other than that, just a lot of short films. So he's a Spanish actor. And a lot of these actors from Spain, they do a lot of short films, but they don't do a lot of like full length films. I don't know if that's a Spanish, thing from Spain, but it was kind of interesting to see that.
Yeah, I guarantee. I'm wondering if like with Guillermo del Toro, if you have a job with him, you have a job for life,
Oh, you do, because this next actor will prove that. It's Federico Lupi. Who played Dr. Casares, who's the mentor, lover of poetry, and the hopeless romantic, and the protector of the orphanage. He was in Kronos. He was in Pan's Labyrinth. He was in Mimic that I believe Del Toro made after this, right after this, and he was just another horror film called Necronomicon. So he is a director that if you get in good with him, you've got a job for life, kind of like Flanagan and some of the others we discussed. Marisa Paredes, who plays Carmen, the head mistress, the rebel, the one-legged Mrs. Robinson.
Oh my God.
You have to watch the movie to get that reference. She was in a movie called The Skin I Live In with Antonio Banderas, which is, I think, interesting.
Okay.
Eduardo Noriega, who plays Jacinto, who is the Judas, the Prince with No Kingdom, and the big bad of the movie. He played in a movie called Trans-Siberian, The Last Stand, and Vantage Point. Kind of some action films for him, wanting to be an action character or actor. Junio Valverde, who plays Santi, the porcelain skin ghost child, tragic figure, and the doomsayer. It's kind of interesting that the ghost is the one who's projecting doom, but like in lore, ghosts are more of the doomsayers because it's usually they appear before in a lot of lore, like they appear before like a major catastrophe.
Yeah.
So that's I think that's interesting. He worked that into this. We have let's see, he was in Shiver, which is funny because he plays another Santi in that, which I find interesting. He played a character with the same name. Tierra de Lobos, a 19th century Western set in Spain. And I think he did that whenever he was like grown up. So that's kind of an interesting thing that he did. We have Irene Vizedo, who plays Conchetta. Inigo Garces, I guess, plays Jaime.
Which is funny because when I heard the name Conchita, I was like, I have an idea in my mind of what a Conchita looks like, and she looks like a Conchita. Very racist.
Well, yeah. And Adrian Lamana, who plays Javes. So the synopsis of this film is it's set in 1939 against the backdrop of the Spanish Civil War between the General Franco's right-wing nationalists and the left-wing Republican forces. A young child named Carlos is brought to the orphanage by his tutor after his father dies in the war. The intelligent yet meek child is taken under the wing of Dr. Cazares under the advice of the headmistress Carmen. Carlos befriends a few of the orphan boys, but is soon the target of not just a bully, it's Jaime, but also the one who sighs, which is Santi, the ghost.
Yeah.
Unexploded bombs, fetus rum, treachery all lead to an explosive conclusion where the fate of the orphans depends on helping the ghost child, Santi, get vengeance against his killer. So, as far as like discussing this movie, I mean, and actually the discussion will probably continue into the trivia for this one because of the nature of the trivia. What did you think of the makeup and effects in this movie?
Okay. I thought they were actually pretty good. Now, it was a low budget, and I did not know that when I watched the film that it was a low budget. I assumed that it was, but given the budget they had and seeing what I saw, I thought it looked pretty good. I'm going to do a slight spoiler alert here. I personally like the way the ghost disappeared. The way, like, when there was a scene where he's touching Carlos, and he, like, reaches out and he just starts to disappear. Not great. There's definitely better CGI out there, but I thought it did really well, and even more now since I know what the budget was.
Yeah, and it was interesting because when he fades away, if I remember right, it's almost like it's like water dissipating, which fits the character, you know, as far as like what.
You know, it's funny. I'm surprised. Now that you say that, I was actually thinking dust in the wind, but now it makes sense. The water does make sense.
Well, because he's got those floaters, you know, like the floating stuff all around him to symbolize that he's in that pool of like whatever it is underneath the, you know, and so he kind of fades, and those are left behind for a brief minute after he disappears, and then they go away behind him.
Yeah.
I think this is one of the coolest ghost designs I've ever seen in a friggin' movie. Like the way that and I mean, we'll get into it when we discuss like what he actually was designed to look like, but just the way that the skin looked like up near where his actual death wound was at, the way the blood like leaked up out of his head, like it was, you know, like where it was like underwater, even though he was on land.
Yeah.
Like I think it's cool. I thought it was a cool way you can tell that Guillermo is like definitely an artistic, type of person before anything else, because like that's where his design process starts at, is like the creatures, and then he kind of expands out from there and kind of like builds things around that.
I thought it was cool too because the kid was he's described as a porcelain looking ghost of sorts, but even the damage to his head, it looks like a cracked porcelain to me if you see it up close.
Yes, and that was the intention that they had with the budget that they were operating on. Their his primary goal was to get that to look like he was a porcelain doll that had like a fractured part of like the head, basically.
Yeah. And then just so we know this moving forward, because I was really curious, I actually looked this up. But the where the water was and where the ghost of this kid pretty much resides, we'll just call it that. And his name is Santi. But it's called a cistern.
Which is something that I thought about whenever the kids were pumping the water out. Are they not pumping the same water that he is currently rotting in? That's just something I thought about.
Yeah.
Okay.
But they don't know. I mean,
yeah, it was a different time where they probably had no. I mean, well, their concerns at that time were definitely not sanitation. I mean, they were in the middle of a war,
yeah,
and could barely get supplies, so they could have gave a shit less about that.
and that water looks like brown and murky, and I mean, I don't know.
I don't know how it came out filtered, to be perfectly honest with you, but that's one
same. Unless they
had
had some
the movie, and that's about it.
They might have some kind of filtration system, some older. I mean, because this is based in the 30s, obviously, or late 30s. So I don't know if they had some kind of. You'd be surprised what they did to kind of make things work, and obviously not as great as modern time, but they had to deal with what they had to do, you know.
Well, going back, I mean, to extreme cases, they could always filter through just like sets of rocks and like charcoal deposits. I mean, and they had access to that stuff back then, so they could have done it in theory. So we've got that. We've got the look of the movie. What did you think about that? Because I mean, we'll get into that a little bit more, but just the general like colors that was in the movie. I mean, I was impressed by that just because it like had that. Kind of had that older look to it, like, kind of that sun kiss, like, older, like Western vibe going on to it.
Oh, I'm glad you mentioned that, because that was the other thing I was going to say is that how it's filmed, I don't know what kind of film rate they used, and I don't know what kind of filters, they're putting into it, but the way they filmed it made it look like an older movie without making it look like an older movie.
Yeah, and that was their intent. They wanted it to have the age to it, almost like a sepia tone, without it quite, without quite delving into that. So
yeah, and they didn't overdo it. They did not overdo it. It wasn't like the previous movies we watched where everything was just had that too much of a bluish tone to it. And we understand what they were trying to go with. They're trying to go with a cool effect. This was going with warmer, but they didn't overdo it in this film.
Not at all. So what do you think about the cinematography of it? I mean, was there anything that stood out with that as far as like certain choices and shots that he had or anything like that?
Okay. One of my favorite shot was I want to say it was in the cistern, and I could be wrong, where it pans away from Carlos. And when it comes back, so the camera goes to the right, and then when it comes back to the left, you got the ghost right behind him that pulls on his shoulder and disappears, and he turns around, and I was just like, oh man, it looked so good to me.
Yeah, that was a good scene, and I liked all the stuff in the cistern because the way that he filmed it, and we'll get that's also in the trivia, but like the cistern looks like massive. Like, it looks like a huge underground space, and he did that deliberately, and we'll get into the reasons why. But I would say that one of my favorite, there's two scenes that stood out in the movie to me that I really love. And one of them is the scene of Carlos at the end of the hallway, Santi, whenever he's chasing after Carlos. Carlos is trying to find a way away from Santi. And you just see Santi like at the end of this long hallway and like framed underneath like this archway.
Yeah.
And it's just like, there's something just so creepy about that image. And like, and that's one of the images that Del Toro said had to be in the movie because it was in his mind before he figured out the rest of the movie itself. He wanted that scene particularly because he said it kind of reminded him of a nightmare that he had when he was a child, like trying to get away from something.
Yeah, and I mean, Santi is already a creepy looking character as it is. But I think the colors of that particular scene, specifically the red and the orange, am I describing this properly?
Yes. There's a lot of red and orange. Yeah.
I don't know. It's like added to the effect of it for some reason.
Especially the blood coming out of his head in that scene. It's way more prominent, The other
that
scene
too.
that I love is, The other scene that I love in that, or in the movie, is right at the end when Cesare's spirit is, spoiler alert. I mean, you're listening to this, so hopefully you've got to that point. But um, he's like watching the spirit. His spirit is watching the boys leave the orphanage, and it's just him silhouetted in black, and like that's all you see of him. You never see his face. It's like you never see anything but his black, like the black outline of his body. And I just love that because there's something sad and creepy about it at the same exact instance, because you know that he's trapped there forever now, but he chose to remain there for, like, I mean, he even told the kids in a prior scene in the movie, he said, "Don't worry, I'm not going to leave you." Like, and that's like, you know, the proof that he won't, because he's stuck there now.
Yeah, and I mean, he made sure that they made it out safe. I mean, he fulfilled. If anything, I feel like he could be at peace if he wanted to, because he fulfilled his promise.
Yeah, he did, but I feel like I don't know that his promise was necessarily to them. I think his promise was just to protect the place in general, because I mean, his ties to Carmen, I think, were holding him back too.
Yeah, maybe.
Because he felt like he didn't do right by her because she died before, and he wasn't able to protect her.
And nothing will hold you down more than a woman. I swear she will hold you back, even if it kills her.
What do you think about the music in the movie?
Okay, if I'm being very honest with you, I didn't notice the music very often, except for the scenes when Santi was about I mean, I guess it makes sense that whenever there's something kind of going on, you know, suspenseful, yes, the music kind of you know, led up to that, which was pretty good. I didn't have any issues with the music.
I was going to say, because we've had the criticism in the last two Asian episodes where you commented their music doesn't necessarily match up in tone to what the horror scene demands. And I feel like this movie had that. I mean, it's got the sweeping building, you know, like creepy music whenever Santi's around to kind of heighten, you know, like, and well, I would say even Jacinto, like it's probably more of an issue. It's played more when he's around. And there's the lack of music in one particular scene we'll get to in the trivia, and there was a reason for why there was no music there. But I feel like that the rest of the music played more like an adventure movie, which was an interesting take that Del Toro did. Like, I mean, he was, I mean, if you listen to it, it's almost like a Spielbergian type, like, you know,
Indiana Jones.
Yeah. It was, I mean, they went that route with a lot of the music, as opposed to like the creepy, just like harpsichord, like banging sounds that you normally hear in a horror movie.
Yeah. And that, I feel like maybe perhaps as a Spaniard type thingy. I mean, we've seen it in other movies. It's not solely strict to them, but I guess for Guillermo del Toro, I don't know if you got into any trivia that would have explained why he felt the need to do that, because I feel like other movies he's made are just mostly darker in tone in terms of music. But this, I don't know. Maybe it's because it brings more of a brightness to the children, you know? I don't know. Makes it a little less dark, but it was still a really good film.
Yeah, he doesn't specifically address the music in that sense, but when we get to what he envisioned the tone of the movie to be, it plays into that.
Okay, so. And I think the contrast works, because 1 minute you're gleeful, 1 minute you're like, fucking shit, you know?
Yeah, exactly. It's like you go from like these little daytime romp scenes between, you know, just like kids having a spat to, you know, like this creepy ghost kid who's, you know, tracking you down in the middle of the night, and, you know, you think might end up killing you if he, you know, grabs you or something. So, you know, it's kind of going back and forth between the two. And interspersed with all that, there's people like literally getting murdered, like in the town, you know, like there's scenes of that, like the actual war itself, you know, that Cesare's, you know, witnesses. And, you know, so that's kind of going on while these kids are having their own little adventure at the orphanage. Like the real world's going through some shit, you know, right around them.
Yeah, the world's falling apart. I'm going to be honest with you. If Santi was coming to me asking me for help would not be the first thing that would be on my mind of helping this child out. Like, oh, why? What do you want? Leave me alone. You're scaring me. I don't like this.
So So we're going to get into this for both these movies that we're discussing today. I wouldn't have stayed around to solve either of these murders. And I mean, one of them is because the ghost is creepy looking, but tragic, which is
Yeah.
Santi. But when we get to the Changeling, it's an outright malevolent type spirit at times. So it's like, why the fuck would I stay around this thing? You know?
Yeah. I mean, I know, I don't know. It is a. Yeah, I guess you don't know it at the time, but for sure you can chalk it up to it's a child that's not being listened to, ultimately, you know.
In both cases,
Yes,
yeah.
and I had to ask little Lucifina. I was like, hey, you know, she's half Mexican, but she's white, you know. And I'm like, okay, what would a white woman do? And I'm like, hey, if you encountered this kind of thing, would you go and investigate? She's like, heck no. And I was like, oh, good, that's the Latina coming through. We would not. We would not be like, what is this? Let me take my little candlelight and go, you know, investigate. That is not in our spirit at all. So, yes, little Lucifina, little Miss I'm not afraid of most things, would not go investigate strange, abnormal noises in a mansion or in a cistern, whatever, or a old creepy orphanage.
I feel like the Appalachian response to this, it goes two ways. It's either I'm getting the hell out of this place, this trailer isn't, you know, worth this, you know, risking my life in, or it's the defiant, no, ain't nobody will tell me that I can't live in my house, especially no fucking ghost, you
This
know. So
here's
it's
my
the two,
property, and I'm gonna do right by it.
yeah. That's the two ways that you got in this area. It's like there's no in between. We
Yeah.
don't care that you're wanting us to solve your murder. We just want you to hell out.
I'll be
So
honest with you. I've had some weird dreams. You know all about them. If something approaches me in my dream and I don't like the feeling, immediately I can in my dream make it go away. But I've never been approached by anything that's scary looking. But if I'm being approached and I say, "What do you need?" and there's a direct message, fine. I'll do it, but then you gotta go. Like that's it. Can you come in? Absolutely, you cannot come in. I know how this works.
yeah, once
I've
you
never been
invite
asked
them
that.
in, you're done.
Yeah, and that
Which
is one thing my grandma, in one of my dreams I had about my grandma after she was deceased, she was like, never call on a spirit. She was like, yeah, maybe a spirit might come to you if they need help. She goes, but do not ever call on any of them.
that plays into quite a bit more. Speaking of, you know, Latin heritage, you know, the orphanage that Del Toro produced later on after this movie, like that plays into that heavily because that's a total situation of where somebody invites the spirit back with them and shit starts happening.
Okay,
So
we talked about the orphanage. Did he do the orphanage?
he produced it. He did not direct it.
Okay, what he is not like on the immediate like bill.
Yeah, it just says if you look at any kind of advertising for it, it just says a Guillermo del Toro production, and like it was like a friend of his that needed some kind of like clout, so Guillermo, you know, like added his name to it just so that he could like you know get the financing, I believe, to get it done.
Okay, but can we agree that this was a Guillermo del Toro film?
The orphanage, for sure. I
Yes.
mean, like it almost feels like a sister movie to this one, to be
Yes.
perfectly honest with you.
Thank you. Because I'm like, okay, because I was looking it up and I was like, God, I really wanted to discuss The Orphanage. I really liked that movie. It was a tragic film for sure. But it says director J.A. Bayona. And I'm like, who the fuck? Okay, I think it's wonderful that Guillermo del Toro is helping him. But this was a Guillermo del Toro film. Sorry, Mr. Bayona.
That's almost like when we talked about Poltergeist when it's supposed to be a Tobe Hooper directed film, and it's like Steven Spielberg got his hands all over that fucking movie.
Yeah,
There's no way it's not a Steven Spielberg movie.
100%.
Well, going back to this movie, The Devil's Backbone, the story in this one, I don't know what you felt about it, but I love the story in this movie. Like I love it. Like I love the way that I mean, it goes in the trivia, but this is like a child. This is like almost a it's like a fairy tale movie, and that's what he you know, like you think about it, like it's got the tropes. It's like a kid is you know, like is orphaned, you know, kind of like Hansel and Gretel, something like that. They're, you know, like met with this you know, otherworldly thing that they've got to deal with, and then they have to, you know, like the witch or whatever, you know, in that story, and they've got to like, you know, rise above and like meet that, you know, even though they're children. It's got all the trappings of that, but it's like in a modern setting, and I love the way he did that.
Yeah, the story, I it's not that it wasn't a good story. There is a lot going on in this story in the background. There's like 2 major plots going on. Well, actually 3 if you count the war outside, you know.
There's the war outside. There's Jacinto trying to get the gold.
Yes.
Which
is a part of the adventure.
Yeah, there's Carmen who's trying to secure their way out of there, but at the same time she's also she's got a potential lover in Dr. Cazares, but like she won't, but like he's impotent, so he can't give her what she wants. So there's that there's that Mexican like televised drama almost going on like romantically between them,
yes.
telenovela or whatever.
Yes.
Which, speaking of that, Guillermo del Toro on the commentary mentioned he loves those. He says he blames his Mexican heritage for that, but he loves the hell out of those, like very, very melodramatic, like, television, style things. So he said if there's any of that snuck into the Carmen, love triangle, he said that blame it on his Mexican heritage because he couldn't leave it out. So
yeah,
there you go.
100%. And I thought Guillermo del Toro was more Spanish than Mexican. Hold on. Oh, no, he's Mexican filmmaker. Yeah. I'm not even fluent in Spanish. And Grandma Beans used to watch the Telemundo is what we have out here. And yes, we watch the telenovelas. And oh my God, they are so dramatic. Just like when you see that gif of the Mexican gasp or gasping in Spanish,
Oh, yeah.
It really is. It is so dramatic. And it's funny because you don't really need like any kind of English translation or anything like that. You know what's going on just off of the acting. They're very interesting.
It's a tangent, but it reminds me a lot of the American soap operas.
Oh, yeah.
Which is what it is, but like, done in a different way. It's there's an old John Candy movie that doesn't get enough love, in my opinion, called Delirious, where he's working on one of those. He's a writer on it.
Yeah.
And he gets knocked out, and he actually becomes like a god in his own like TV show because whatever he writes comes true.
Oh my God.
And it's like everybody in that world, like, they deliver their lines like they're in, like a very bad soap opera, because there's like one character who's always saying that he's been like adopted. And every time that he talks to Raymond Burr, like, he's like, well, maybe I'll find that out when I find my mother. And then like it plays dun, 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 like in the background. It's just, it's so good, like the way they dramatize everything in it.
Another tangent, but at least it's about Guillermo del Toro, is Guillermo del Toro looks like a white man.
Yes, he does. Yes, he does.
This is why I thought he was Spaniard. I was looking at him, and I know they make Mexicans in that color. Okay, I'm a pretty pasty Mexican. But he's also got blue eyes. Now, green eyes are common with Mexicans, but blue is not very common, so that's funny.
Yeah, he comments that not only is Carlos modeled after him in the movie, but the character of Jaime is the bully in the movie is actually modeled after him. But there's only one aspect, and that's the fact that Jaime in the movie has like that whole love affair with Conchetta that's never resolved because obviously she's way too old for him. But like Del Toro admits, he's like he was always pining after these beautiful women that he had no chance in hell of ever getting when he was a kid. So
yeah.
he said that's kind of the where Jaime is like based on him too, to an extent.
Also, hold on, not moving on from Guillermo yet. If you Google Guillermo del Toro, the first question Google asks are Benicio del Toro and Guillermo del Toro related?
Related.
The answer is no, ladies and gentlemen. Just because they have that del Toro last name.
You can tell by their appearance that they are not related. One is very much more on the, like darker, side, and the other one is, like you said, looks kind of like a white guy. So,
yeah.
I don't know, the story, I like that, like we talked about, that playful, like adventure part of it. I don't know. I know there's a lot going on. There's all these different aspects, but I feel like they work into the overall story. Like, yeah. I mean, like they get wrapped up enough to where there's no like hanging threads anywhere, or at least not any that were unintended.
Yeah. I mean, I think by the time you see, well, I don't know. I mean, unless I missed something. I mean, yes, at the end there's some children that escape, but is there any implication what happens after that?
Oh, we'll get into that. There's some meaning behind that. This
Okay.
movie is loaded with meaning upon meaning. This is almost like Kubrick's The
What? A
Shining, as far as
Guillermo
like
del
some.
Toro film? No.
Yeah. There's yeah. I do want to say a couple things though. In the scene where the boys are fighting Jacinto in the like under part of the the caverns or
The
whatever,
cistern.
the cistern part of it. Um, I got a lot of vibes from Lord of the Flies from that scene, like because they were like making the pig stickers basically.
Yeah.
That's how they took him out.
The pig stickers.
And of course well, that's what they were. I mean,
Yeah.
And he was a fascist pig, and we'll get into that whole thing. So it kind of works. And also the fact that the way he dies, he's weighed down by his own gold.
Oh,
I felt
yeah.
like that's poetic, and I know it's more things than just that, but I got a lot of vibes from like I mentioned earlier, Judas in the Bible or whatever. Like he basically sold them out for like his 30 pieces of silver or whatever it was, and it ends up that drug him down and caused his death anyway. So it was like is a morality tale, like what he sought out and then sacrificed everything for was actually his unmaking in the end anyways.
It's like he brought the gift of murder.
Murder.
Judas, no.
Santi, no. Yeah, no, actually do hold him under the water. That's right. Kill him.
Oh my God. Yeah, that was pretty cool too. But yes, the definitely the gold bringing him down was poetic justice for sure.
Anything else you want to add about the story before we get into this trivia? Because this is some good trivia for this episode.
You know what? I just want to circle back around to this being like an adventure because it really was. I mean, it was a scary adventure, but it really does show that this really wasn't like a made-up adventure. Yes, there was a ghost in it, but if these kids weren't like preparing themselves for battle against, why do I want to say Judas now? Thank you.
Jacinto,
they would have had to prepare for battle for something else. That wasn't something that was uncommon. Mexico went through something very similar where a lot of kids were in orphanages because there was a war that was going on. And sometimes a lot of them had to fight for their lives too. And they're just children.
Well, and that's something I'm glad you brought up I feel like, and we don't give this credit in movies that do it well, I feel like the children felt like children in this movie, like the sense that they their motivations, the way they acted, they're like just some of the stuff they did, like the way they talked to each other, the fact that the one who's the artist, the bully Jaime, like his art, like when he drew a woman, like he drew a sideways vagina because he didn't know that they went the other way. Like there's all those little elements that added up, and I feel like it added to the feeling of that it was like because you watch some films and the kids, like, for instance, The Ring, the American version of The Ring, that kid acted unnatural. He was like way too old for his age as far as the way he acted. The kids felt like kids in this movie. And I like that whenever they do that with films like this.
Yeah, and it made it more emotional because, yes, while they felt like kids, they're having to do stuff beyond their years and they're still having to survive. And that is almost a million times harder for a child. I mean, yes, they're resilient, but at the same time, they don't have the survival skills that an adult has.
No, and there's always that sadness that goes. So that's part of the movie too. Not only for the kids, but for the country of Spain. I think is what he was intending with that. But there's that loss of innocence that you can never get back. Once it's gone, it's gone.
Yeah, but like I said, it's survival at the end of the day.
Yeah, and there's a bittersweet, feeling that goes along with all that. Do you want to get into the trivia now?
Yes.
Okay. So this was described by Guillermo del Toro as being a sibling film to Pan's Labyrinth in the 2006 film.
So this one's the older brother?
Yeah, this one's the masculine older brother. And Pan's Labyrinth is the younger feminine sister film. The stories of both films rhyme with each other. They have a bookend narration. The story beats happen around the same time in the movie, and etc. Like what happens to the girl in Pan's Labyrinth is like in her setting, which is after the Spanish. They're both connected by the Spanish War as well.
Okay.
This is before the Spanish, is set at the end of the Spanish Civil War, and then where there's still hope that the rebels can fight back the Franco regime. Pan's Labyrinth is set after the war, and you're actually seeing that all the hope that's lost because the fascists have taken over, and like the just like how they're operating now. And the little girl has to. That's the world she lives in, and that's why she escapes into that fantasy fairy world that she does in that movie.
Okay.
So it's interesting that these two movies have that connection to each other. It's like they're happening at opposite, like in the same country at opposite ends of the same situation with drastically different, because even the coloring is different in the movies. Like you watch Pan's Labyrinth, it's more like blue-green, whereas this is more like the golden bronze rust, colors. And it's just I think there's something so neat about that he took that consideration and he made the two films that way.
Yeah, very creative of him. However, I want to know if there's been any pushback to the fact that he's like, oh, this is a masculine film and this is a feminine film. I don't know that. I mean, it's widely known that when you're talking about speaking Spanish, that when it comes to describing, there's feminine and masculine pronouns, and that's how it is.
That's how the language is established, yes.
Yeah, and so, I mean, it's like that in English, too. Not entirely, but it's like you're going to force someone to change a whole language. So I wonder, because he used that description, if there's people out there, I could totally see people being like, well, I mean, what about them,
Well, to be fair, he did establish all this stuff prior to the worst of what we're into right now. I want to say that the latest that a lot of his interviews about these films come out was like 2009 or something, and it was like the rails went off of that whole train right after that. So
all right.
But yeah, you're right. If people heard that now, I'm sure that they'd be like, what about the the non-binaries and all that stuff? And I feel like people need perspective on stuff too. It's like even at that time, like the time these movies were set, I mean, there would have been none of that going on. Like that's a fairly recent phenomenon to even describe anything that way. But
Reverend, it's never too late to go back and change to be on the right side of history.